my lovely creative, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Irene and in today's tutorial I'm going to teach you how to make a negative painting in watercolors. Negative painting is a really great technique and I love it because you can give so much depth to your paintings and it's actually quite easy. So let me show you how to do that. Before we dive into the video, let me ask you to subscribe to this channel. If you enjoy painting classes, drawing classes, sketchbooking, anything creative, make sure you subscribe and click on that little bell so you get notified whenever I post a new video. I host lots of live sessions on here as well, so there's lots of opportunity to get creative together. So without further ado, let's start painting together. So there we are. Let me list all the materials that you need to make a negative painting first. So you can see that I'm taping my paper to a board. I'm using washi tape and 300 GSM watercolor paper by Bockingford. And I'm taping it to a board, but you don't need to do that. You can tape it to the table or don't tape your picture at all. It is really up to your own preferences. You can also use a sketchbook if you prefer that. I would recommend using paper that is suitable for watercolors because we are going to use quite a lot of water. And if your paper is not suitable for that, it might damage, and yeah, that's just a shame if you put lots of effort in. So make sure you use paper appropriate for watercolors. Other materials that you need for today's session are watercolor in the colors of your choice, a brush, water and a cloth to soak up extra water and to clean your brush on. Step 1 is making your entire paper a little bit wet. Step 2 is mixing the right colors. So I'm going to work in blues today, so I am going to mix up enough blue to paint my first layer completely. And because the paper is a little bit wet, the paint will flow over the paper really easily. See, there we go. Step 2 is mix your color and add a first layer of paint to your paper. This is actually called the wet on wet technique. So I'm adding my paint quite evenly over the entire paper. And you can see how the wetness of the paper really helps spread that paint around and create a really soft color. So you might have to do multiple colors just to create the tone that you're looking for. You can also add multiple colors to the background. Maybe you want a bit of yellow in there for light shining through the leaves. So add in a bit of color. You can see I'm adding in a bit of green here and there as well to create a dynamic background. This is going to be the lightest color on our paper. So the lightest leaves, the ones that are in the foreground, are going to be this color. And that is what negative painting means. It means that we are going to paint the spaces around the objects that we want to show. So what we paint first, this layer is going to be our the area that is closest to us, our front leaves. It takes a little bit of time to get your head around that. Let everything dry completely. This is very important. You need to be patient and let everything dry. And then you're ready for your next step. We are now going to start painting our first shapes. And what we are painting are leaves, but we're not painting the leaves itself, but instead we are painting the shapes, the areas in between the leaves. So the shadows that might be in between the leaves. If this is new to you, then remember that you can make a little sketch first if you find that easier. Once your paper is dry, you can make a sketch, but don't feel like you have to. But remember that the lightest color is the leaf in front and the darker colors are further and further back. So you can see I'm started with a cross type shape and now I'm going to add in more leaves. It's okay if it's a bit wonky, it doesn't have to be perfect. So this is the negative painting. We're not painting the objects itself, but the spaces in between them. Now we're doing that on our entire page until you have as many or as few leaves as you would like to be on the front of your picture. And then you let everything dry again. The drying part is very important because as long as your paint is wet, it will blur out and mix up together. So give it enough time to dry or use a hairdryer to dry it in between the layers. When you add your blue or whatever color you're using, you can always drop in a little bit of a different color. So you can see that I'm adding blue now, you can see some green and some blue shining through. And now I'm dropping in a bit of dark green to make the color a bit more interesting and because I like to mix my colors up a bit. So there we go. Let everything dry completely. You can see the colors look a bit lighter now. And now we're going to do the next layer. So now you need to pay a bit of attention because this layer is going to be behind those light leaves that we have just done. That means that you might see part of a leaf on one side of these light leaves and part of the leaf on the other side. And again, what we are painting is not the leaves itself, but the dark shadows in between. So it becomes a little bit tricky, but if you sort of visualize what we're doing, or you look at the final picture that I've made, then hopefully it makes sense. So you're painting the areas in between the leaves, but also remember to not go over those light areas that we have just created. And also, you can sketch this out first if you want. Feel free to use a sketch pencil and add in the shapes of the leaves the way you want them, because that can make it a little bit easier. See, I'm creating some rounded shapes here for the leaves, and then in between I am going to make it darker. Let me speed this up a little bit so it makes sense and you see what that looks like. You can use this technique for as many layers as you like. So I think I made 3 layers in the end of paint. I'll need to count them once I finish the entire video. So I think I did 3 layers, but you can do 4, 5, 6. Carry on as long as you want. Keep adding multiple leaves. So focus on the shapes in between the leaves that you're adding the paint on. And those shapes are getting darker and darker. And that creates that 3D effect where you feel like there's depth in your picture. So I'm making my paint a little bit darker. See, there we go. And then there's that leaf at the top. I'm just sketching it out with paint, but you can, of course, absolutely do this with a sketch pencil if you find that a little bit easier. I quite like that sort of wonkiness that you create if you go straight in with paint. Sort of irregularity of the shapes. So, there we go. I'm doing this over the entire page. The last part of this layer, and then you will let everything dry again. So you can use a hairdryer to let things dry, or you can just let it dry naturally, go make a cup of tea, and then when you come back it will be ready to paint on again. So you can see how each layer of paint makes the color a little bit deeper and a bit darker. I really like the textures that you get with watercolor painting. And when you paint is still a little bit wet and you drop in a bit of a different color, the colors tend to mix up and blend in together, and I just think that that texture is gorgeous. It's something that I really enjoy. So once you've done this layer and you let it dry completely, you can do another one. See, there we go. You can see how these colors have dried up. Everything always looks a little bit lighter once it's dry, so keep that in mind. So once everything is dry, you can do the next layer. And you can see how that color comes out even darker. I've also just mixed the color a little bit darker because I want to accentuate that even more. So we're doing the same thing, adding in the space between the leaves in the leaves that are even further underneath. And the areas that you paint get smaller and smaller. So I'm using a slightly smaller brush as well, but also just the area where you want to add paint becomes smaller and smaller. So each layer is a little bit faster. With a really small brush, if you want, when you're finished with your layers, you can add in some fine details on the leaves. So you can see I'm using this small brush and I'm just adding in some lines and some extra little things that now everything is dry, it's easier to add in. And that just sort of completes the picture. I really hope you enjoy this. I would really recommend you try it out. You can do this in multiple colors. This would also look really nice with browns and reds for a much more warmer autumn look. It doesn't have to be leaves either. You can do this with abstract shapes or with other objects. But give it a go and let me know what you think if you're enjoying this, because I really love this type of painting and I think it looks really nice, and I'm curious to hear what you think of it as well. So I'm just adding in these finishing touches and then I am finished with my painting. So thank you so much for being here. Remember that if you enjoyed this tutorial that you subscribe. and that you click on that little bell to get updates when I post something. I've removed the tape and here we go. All done for today. So thank you so much for being here and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.